The alarm sounded at 0500 hours, ship time. Zektar woke immediately, his military training taking over. The red lights in his quarters flashed in rhythm with the alert tone. He dressed quickly and made his way to the bridge. The USS Liberty was already moving into attack formation with the rest of the human fleet. Through the main view screen, Zektar could see Kepler 442 be growing larger as they approached. The planet looked peaceful from space, its blue oceans and green continents showing no sign of the horror taking place on its surface. "Krek's fleet positioning?" Morrison asked as he settled into his captain's chair. 12 ships in standard defensive formation, Carter reported. 3 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and 3 support vessels. They're maintaining orbit around the primary mining facility. Any response to our arrival? They're powering weapons and moving to intercept. No communication attempts, Morrison nodded. They know why we're here. All ships, this is Liberty Actual. Begin attack run Alpha. Target the heavy cruisers first. We go in fast and we hit them hard? Zektar took his position at a secondary tactical console. He had studied human weapons technology but had never seen it used in actual combat. The Liberty's main guns were easily 3 times more powerful than anything in the Valorian fleet. First wave launching, Rodriguez reported from the Marine Bay. 60 dropships with full assault teams. The space battle began with a thunderous roar as the human ships opened fire. Zektar watched in amazement as streams of energy and projectiles crossed the space between the two fleets. The humans didn't waste time with warning shots or attempts at communication. They simply began destroying everything that stood between them and the planet. The first Krek's heavy cruiser exploded in a ball of flame and debris. The humans had concentrated their fire on its main reactor, and the resulting explosion took out 2 smaller ships that had been flying too close. The remaining Krek's vessels scattered, trying to use evasive maneuvers to avoid the devastating human firepower. Second cruiser is breaking apart, Carter announced. Direct hit on their command section. Third cruiser is trying to run, someone else called out. Negative, Morrison said firmly. Nothing gets away. Nothing. Zektar had expected the humans to be efficient in battle. What he hadn't expected was the cold fury with which they fought. There was no hesitation, no mercy for ships trying to surrender. The Kreks had enslaved human civilians, and the humans were making them pay for it. The space battle was over in less than 30 minutes. 12 Krek ships had been reduced to floating wreckage. The human fleet had taken some damage, but nothing serious enough to slow their assault on the planet. All ships begin orbital bombardment of military targets, Morrison ordered. I want every Krek's weapon emplacement, communication array, and defensive position reduced to rubble. But watch your targeting. There are civilians down there. Zektar watched as the human ships began raining destruction on the planet's surface. But even in their fury, they maintained precise control. The targeting computers identified military installations and destroyed them with surgical precision. Civilian areas were left untouched. First wave has landed, Rodriguez reported. Resistance is heavy, but we're pushing through. Casualties? Light so far? The enemy wasn't expecting us to hit this hard this fast, Morrison turned to Zektar. Commander, would you like to join the second wave? I think you'd find it educational, Zektar nodded. He wanted to see human ground combat tactics firsthand. 20 minutes later, he was strapped into a dropship alongside 30 human Marines. The ship shook and bucked as it descended through the planet's atmosphere, dodging anti-aircraft fire from the remaining Krek's positions. Lieutenant Ben Rodriguez sat across from him, checking his weapon one final time. The other Marines were doing the same. They moved with practiced efficiency, but Zektar could see the tension in their faces. They knew what they would find on the ground. 30 seconds to touchdown, the pilot announced as Rodriguez stood up and faced his troops. Listen up, people. Intelligence reports confirm the Kreks have been using the civilians for forced labor in the mining operations. We've seen their methods before. Expect the worst and be ready for anything. Rules of engagement are simple. Any Kreks with a weapon is a target. Any Kreks who surrenders gets taken prisoner. Any civilian, regardless of species, gets protected. Questions? There were no questions. The dropship touched down in a cloud of dust and steam. The rear hatch dropped open and the Marines poured out, weapons ready. Zektar followed them, his own sidearm drawn and ready. The landing zone was a cleared air about 2 kilometers from the main mining complex. The humans had chosen it because it was far enough from the slave quarters to avoid civilian casualties, but close enough to provide quick access to the main facility. The landscape was scarred and ugly. The Kreks had strip-mined large sections of the area, leaving behind piles of waste rock and chemical-stained pools of water. In the distance, Zektar could see the massive structures of the mining operation rising into the sky like mechanical mountains. Movement 2 o'clock. One of the Marines called out. A squad of Krek soldiers was advancing toward their position, firing energy weapons as they moved. The humans responded immediately, taking cover behind rocks and equipment and returning fire with devastating accuracy. Zektar had fought alongside other species before, but he had never seen anything like the way humans moved in combat. They flowed across the battlefield like water, always finding the best positions, always coordinating their attacks for maximum effect. Within minutes, the attacking Krek squad had been eliminated. "Advance by squads," Rodriguez ordered. "Stay sharp and watch for traps." They moved toward the mining complex in a series of coordinated rushes. Each squad would advance while the others provided covering fire, then take defensive positions while the next group moved forward. It was textbook military tactics, but executed with a precision that impressed Zektar. The first major resistance came at the outer perimeter of the mining facility. The Kreks had set up defensive positions behind concrete barriers and were putting up fierce resistance. Energy beams and projectiles filled the air as both sides exchanged fire. "We need to flank them," Rodriguez said, studying the enemy positions through his scope. "If we can get around to their left side, we can hit them from 2 directions." "I'll take second squad around," Sergeant Kelly Wang volunteered. "Give us 10 minutes to get into position." Zektar watched as Wang led her squad in a wide circle around the Krek's positions. The humans moved like shadows, using every piece of cover available. When they were in position, Rodriguez gave the signal to attack. The coordinated assault was devastating. Caught between 2 groups of human Marines, the Krek's defenders were overwhelmed in minutes. But as the humans advanced to secure the area, they discovered something that changed the entire tone of the battle. Behind the defensive positions was a holding area filled with alien civilians. Men, women, and children from a dozen different species were crowded together in cages barely large enough to hold them. They were thin and dirty, clearly malnourished and abused. Many showed signs of beatings. Some were too weak to stand. The change in the humans was immediate and frightening. The professional soldiers who had been methodically destroying Krek's positions suddenly became something else entirely. Their faces went hard as stone. Their movements became sharper, more aggressive. When they spoke, their voices carried a cold fury that made Zektar's skin crawl. "Medical teams to the holding area," Rodriguez said into his communicator. "We need food, water, and medical supplies, now." While some of the Marines worked to free the prisoners, others continued the advance toward the main facility. But now they moved with a different purpose. Before, they had been soldiers following orders. Now they were avengers seeking justice. The next Krek's position they encountered was a guard tower overlooking one of the mining pits. Instead of the careful, methodical assault they had used before, the humans simply destroyed it. They used heavy weapons to reduce the entire structure to rubble, not caring whether anyone inside had a chance to surrender. "Rodriguez," Morrison's voice came over the radio. "What's your status?" "We've secured the outer perimeter and liberated approximately 200 civilians," Rodriguez reported. "They're in bad shape, sir. The Kreks have been using them for heavy labor with minimal food and medical care. Some of them have been beaten." There was a long pause before Morrison responded. "Understood. Continue your advance. Take the main facility. And secure any remaining civilians." "Yes, sir." "And the Krek's personnel?" Another pause. "Follow standard protocols, Lieutenant. But if they resist, put them down." The assault on the main mining facility was unlike anything Zektar had ever witnessed. The humans attacked with a ferocity that bordered on savage. They used explosives to blow holes in walls instead of looking for doors. They fired first and asked questions later. Any Krek soldier who showed even the slightest resistance was cut down immediately, but it was when they found the punishment. Cells that Zektar truly understood. Why other species feared human anger. The cells were located in the basement of the main administration building. They were small, dark chambers where the Kreks had kept civilians who had tried to resist or escape. The conditions were horrific. 3 days had passed since the incident in the hallway. Katie found that her daily routine had changed in unexpected ways. Aliens who had previously ignored her now stepped aside when she walked by. Some greeted her with respectful nods. Others watched her with open curiosity, as if trying to understand how someone so small could be so dangerous. Katie was in the station's fitness center during her off-duty hours. The room was designed to accommodate different species, with variable gravity zones and various types of exercise equipment. She had chosen a section with Earth-normal gravity to do her daily workout. The routine was simple by human standards. Push-ups, sit-ups, running on the treadmill, and weightlifting. She kept the weights moderate, only about 60 pounds per hand. Back home, this would have been considered a light maintenance workout. To the small group of aliens who had gathered to watch. It looked like something from a nightmare. Katie finished her third set of pull-ups and noticed the audience. A group of 6 aliens from different species stood near the entrance, staring at her with wide eyes. She recognized 2 of them as junior diplomats who worked in the trade negotiations department. "Can I help you with something?" Katie asked, toweling off the sweat from her face. A young VRN with bright green chitin stepped forward nervously. "Lieutenant Morgan, we apologize for staring. We have never seen a human exercise before. Is this normal for your species?" Katie looked around at the equipment she had been using. "This is pretty basic stuff. Why?" The VRN gestured toward the weights Katie had been lifting. "Those masses would require mechanical assistance for most of us to move. You have been lifting them with just your arms for the past hour." "Oh," Katie said, understanding the confusion. "I guess the gravity difference makes a bigger impact than I thought. Would you like me to show you how human exercise works?" Before any of them could answer, a familiar voice spoke from behind the group. "I would be very interested in that demonstration." Zephyk walked into the fitness center, moving carefully as if his body was still sore. He had spent the past 3 days researching everything the galactic databases contained about Earth and its inhabitants. What he had learned both fascinated and terrified him. "Mr. Zephyk," Katie said politely. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," the Altarian replied. "I have been studying your homeworld extensively. I find myself with many questions about human capabilities." Katie gestured toward the exercise equipment. "I would be happy to answer what I can. Would you like to try some basic exercises? I could adjust them for your physiology." The group of aliens exchanged nervous glances. The idea of trying to match human physical activity seemed dangerous. "Perhaps we should start with something simple," Zephyk suggested. "Could you show us how humans measure physical fitness?" Katie thought about the best way to demonstrate. "Well, there are different types of fitness: strength, endurance, flexibility, speed, and coordination. Most humans try to maintain at least basic levels in all areas." She walked over to the treadmill. "This measures cardiovascular endurance, how long you can keep your heart and lungs working at elevated levels." Katie set the machine to what she considered a gentle jogging pace and began running. Her breathing remained steady and relaxed as the minutes passed. "How fast are you moving?" asked a depth swimmer whose translation device made its voice sound like water flowing over rocks. Katie glanced at the display. "About 8 miles per hour. This is a warm-up pace for humans. I could maintain this speed for several hours without serious fatigue." The aliens made various sounds of amazement. Several took out recording devices to document what they were. Seeing after 15 minutes of easy running, Katie stopped and moved to the strength training area. This tests muscular power and endurance, she explained. Setting up a barbell with weights that looked enormous to her audience, she performed several sets of exercises, explaining each one. Squats to work the legs, bench press for the chest and arms, deadlift for the back. To Katie, these were routine movements she had been doing since high school. To the watching aliens, it looked like she was casually manipulating masses that should have required industrial machinery. Lieutenant Morgan, Zephyk said slowly, what? Would you consider an impressive display of human strength? Katie paused to consider the question. I'm just average, so I probably am not the best example. But I have seen human athletes lift over 500 pounds. Marathon runners who can run for hours at speeds faster than I was just demonstrating. Gymnasts who can do incredible acrobatic moves that seem to defy gravity. 500 pounds? Squeaked a small gray alien. That is more than most of our cargo loading equipment can handle. Our Olympic weightlifters can do much more than that, Katie said. And those are just the official competitions. Some humans who work in dangerous jobs develop even greater strength and endurance. Zephyk was taking careful notes on a handheld device. What about combat training? You mentioned that all human soldiers learn fighting techniques. Katie looked around at the nervous faces watching her. I could show you some basic moves, but I would need to be very careful. Human combat training is designed to work against other humans who are much tougher than most aliens. Perhaps a demonstration against an inanimate object? Suggested the Vearan diplomat. Katie found a heavy punching bag designed for species with natural armor. It was made of materials that could withstand impacts from creatures with claws and spikes. She put on protective gloves and began a simple boxing routine. Her punches came fast and precise. Each impact made a sharp sound that echoed through the fitness center. The bag, which weighed over 200 pounds, swung violently with each hit. Katie's movements were fluid and controlled. Like a deadly dance. After a few minutes, she stopped and turned to her audience. Several aliens had backed away from the demonstration. Others stood frozen in place. That was basic boxing, Katie explained. Most humans learn some version of it for exercise and self-defense. There are dozens of other fighting styles, each with different techniques and philosophies. Zephyk approached the punching bag and examined the impact points. The surface showed clear impressions where Katie's gloves had hit. These strikes could seriously injure most species, he observed. That is why I held back, Katie said. I used maybe 10% of my full strength. Against a living opponent, I would target specific vulnerable points to end the fight quickly without causing permanent damage. An emergency alarm suddenly echoed through the fitness center. The lights changed from normal white to flashing yellow, and a recorded voice began speaking in multiple languages. Attention all station personnel. We have received a distress signal from the cargo vessel Morning Star. The ship has suffered critical engine failure in the Kepler asteroid field. Life support is failing. All available rescue craft are requested to respond immediately. Katie was moving toward the exit before the announcement finished. Her relaxed demeanor had instantly shifted to focused alertness. Where are you going? Zephyk called after her. To volunteer for the rescue mission, Katie replied without stopping. People are in trouble. Zephyk and the other aliens hurried to follow her. They had just spent an hour learning about human physical capabilities. Now they were about to see those abilities put to use in a real emergency. As they reached the docking bay, Katie was already talking to the rescue coordinator, a veteran pilot from the Helix species. The coordinator's crystalline body was flashing rapid patterns of light, indicating high stress. The asteroid field is too dense for our large rescue ships, the coordinator explained. We need someone who can pilot a small craft through extremely dangerous conditions. The navigation computer rates the mission as impossible. Katie looked at the available ships. I volunteer, she said simply. Lieutenant, the coordinator replied, this mission would challenge our best pilots. The conditions out there are beyond what most species can handle. Katie smiled grimly. Sir, with respect, I grew up dodging tornadoes and hurricanes. A little space debris does not scare me. Some of the prisoners had been there for weeks without adequate food or water. Others showeth mourning after the battle brought new challenges that Zektar hadn't expected. As he walked through the temporary camp the humans had established, he saw something that confused him more than the violence of the previous day. Human medics were treating wounded Krek soldiers with the same care they gave to their own injured Marines. The same hands that had pulled triggers and thrown grenades were now gently cleaning wounds and administering pain medication. The same voices that had shouted orders to kill were now speaking softly to comfort patients who had been trying to kill them just hours before. Zektar stopped at one of the medical stations where a human doctor named Ryan Clark was working on a Krek soldier who had taken shrapnel in his leg. The reptilian creature was clearly in pain, but Clark worked with steady patience to remove the metal fragments and seal the wound. "Does it hurt when I do this?" Clark asked, pressing gently around the injury site. The Krek soldier nodded, his yellow eyes watching the human doctor with obvious confusion. "Why are you helping me? Your people killed my squad mates." Clark didn't look up from his work. "Because you're injured, and I'm a doctor. That's how it works. But I am your enemy. Right now you're my patient. We'll worry about the enemy part later." The Krek soldier fell silent, clearly struggling to understand the human concept of medical neutrality. Zektar understood his confusion. In most military cultures, wounded enemies were either executed to prevent future resistance or left to die to conserve resources. The idea of using precious medical supplies on captured foes seemed wasteful at best. After finishing with the Krek's patient, Clark moved on to a human Marine who had burns on his arms. The transition was seamless. There was no difference in the quality of care or the doctor's bedside manner. Enemy or ally, the injured received the same treatment. "Dr. Clark," Zektar said, approaching the human. "May I ask you something?" "Sure, Commander. What's on your mind?" "Yesterday I watched your people execute Krek's prisoners who had participated in torture. Today I see you treating Krek's wounded with the same care you give your own soldiers. I'm trying to understand the logic of this approach." Clark finished bandaging the Marine's arms before answering. "There's no contradiction. The ones we executed yesterday were war criminals who had forfeited their right to live by torturing innocents. These wounded soldiers are prisoners of war, who deserve medical care according to galactic conventions. But they were shooting at you just yesterday. They would have killed you if they could. That was yesterday. Today they're wounded and defenseless. The situation has changed, so our response changes too." Zektar watched as Clark moved to his next patient, a young Krek soldier who couldn't have been much older than a juvenile. The creature's arm was badly broken, the bone clearly visible through torn flesh. Despite the severity of the injury, Clark worked with the same gentle precision he had shown all his patients. "This is going to hurt," Clark warned as he began setting the bone. "But I'll give you something for the pain as soon as I'm done." The young Krek soldier gritted his teeth and endured the procedure without complaint. When Clark finished and administered the pain medication, the soldier looked up at him with obvious gratitude. "Thank you," the soldier said quietly. "You're welcome. Try not to move that arm for at least a week, and if the pain gets worse, let one of the medics know." As they walked away from the medical area, Zektar tried to process what he had seen. "Doctor, that young soldier you just treated. In 6 months, when his arm heals, he could be shooting at your people again. Maybe seeing how we treat prisoners will make him think twice about following orders to torture civilians. Or maybe he'll decide his government isn't worth dying for. People can change, Commander. And if he doesn't change? If he goes back to fighting you?" Clark shrugged. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not going to let a kid die from a broken arm because of what he might do in the future." They were interrupted by the arrival of Major Helen Foster, who was in charge of prisoner processing. She was a tall woman with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Commander Zektar," she said, "Captain Morrison asked me to show you our prisoner operations. He thought you might find it educational." Foster led him to a large tent that had been set up as a temporary holding facility. Inside, over 200 Krek soldiers sat in organized groups guarded by human Marines. The prisoners looked nervous, but not terrified. They had been given food, water, and medical attention for their wounds. "We're processing them according to their level of involvement in the civilian abuse," Foster explained. "The ones who were just regular soldiers following orders will be held as prisoners of war until the conflict ends. The ones who participated in torture or execution of civilians will be tried for war crimes." "How do you determine who did what?" "Interviews with the rescued civilians, examination of facility records, and testimony from other prisoners. It's not a perfect system, but it's fair." Zektar watched as human soldiers moved among the prisoners, distributing food and checking on their welfare. The contrast with what he had witnessed the day before was striking. These same Marines had been killing Krek soldiers with ruthless efficiency just hours ago. Now they were ensuring their comfort and safety. "Major Foster," he said, "I observed several summary executions yesterday. Prisoners who had surrendered were killed without trial." Foster's expression hardened slightly. "Those weren't executions, Commander. Those were combat actions against war criminals caught in the act. There's a difference between killing someone who's torturing civilians and executing a prisoner after due process. The distinction seems arbitrary. It's not arbitrary at all. It's about context and evidence. If we catch someone in the act of torturing a child, they get shot. If we capture someone who might have been involved but we need to investigate, they get a trial. Clear rules, clearly applied." Foster led him to an interview area where human intelligence officers were questioning Krek's prisoners. The interrogations were professional and courteous. The humans offered food and water to their subjects. They asked direct questions but didn't use threats or intimidation. "We're looking for information about other Krek's facilities in this sector," Foster explained. "Some of these prisoners have been very cooperative. They're as disgusted by what happened here as we are." One of the interrogators, a soft-spoken woman named Lieutenant Carol Stone, was interviewing a middle-aged Krex officer. The prisoner was answering questions freely, even providing details about Krek's military operations in nearby systems. "Why is he being so cooperative?" Zektar asked. "Because he knows we'll treat him fairly if he helps us," Stone replied. "And because he's horrified by what his own government did to those civilians. Not every Krek soldier is a monster." "What will happen to him?" "If he continues to cooperate and his story checks out, he'll be classified as a prisoner of war and held in comfortable conditions until the conflict ends. If we can verify that he tried to prevent abuse of civilians, he might even be eligible for early release." Zektar found this approach puzzling. "You reward enemy soldiers for betraying their own government?" "We reward enemy soldiers for doing the right thing," Foster corrected. "There's a difference." As the day progressed, Zektar witnessed more examples of the strange duality in human behavior. He saw Marines sharing their rations with hungry prisoners. He watched human engineers working alongside Krex technicians to repair damaged infrastructure. He observed human psychologists providing counseling to traumatized civilians and enemy soldiers alike, but he also saw the other side of human nature. When a group of rescued civilians demanded the right to execute their former captors, it was human soldiers who stood between them and vengeance. When several Krex prisoners attempted to escape, they were recaptured quickly and efficiently. And, when interrogators discovered evidence of additional war crimes, the responsible parties were quietly removed from the general population and never seen again. The most striking example came in the afternoon, when a Krex prisoner attacked one of the human medics. The creature had been pretending to be unconscious when Dr. Clark approached to check his wounds. As Clark bent over him, the Krex grabbed a piece of medical equipment and tried to stab the doctor in the neck. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 human Marines tackled the attacker and pinned him to the ground. Within seconds, a dozen more soldiers had surrounded the area with weapons drawn. The Krex prisoner found himself staring down the barrels of enough firepower to level a small building, but instead of shooting him, the Marines simply restrained him while Clark examined his own minor injuries. The doctor had managed to avoid the worst of the attack, suffering only a small cut on his arm. "Are you all right, Doc?" one of the Marines asked, I'm fine, just a scratch. What do you want us to do with this one? Clark looked down at the cracks. Prisoner, who was now secured with restraints and surrounded by very angry human soldiers. Treat his wounds and put him in isolation, and make sure he gets a psychiatric evaluation. Someone that desperate might be suicidal. The Marines looked at each other in disbelief. Doc, he just tried to kill you. And he failed. Now he's a P? Captain Zethver stood at the docking bay window and watched the human ship grow larger. The UCS Dakota looked simple compared to Corvani vessels. Its hull was gray metal with no fancy decorations. Human ships always looked plain to him. He had seen pictures before, but this was his first time boarding one. The Galactic Council had ordered this exchange program 6 months ago. Every major species had to send officers to learn from each other. Most Corvani leaders thought it was a waste of time. Humans had only been in space for 200 years. What could they teach races that had traveled the stars for thousands of years? Zethver adjusted his uniform and checked his translator device. He spoke some human languages, but the translator would help with technical terms. The docking tube connected with a soft thud. Green lights flashed, showing the seal was good. The airlock opened and Zethver stepped inside the human ship. The first thing he noticed was the temperature. It was warmer than Corvani ships. The air smelled different too. Not bad, just different. There was something else in the air that he could not name. A human woman in uniform waited for him. She was shorter than most Corvani, but stood straight and confident. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat style. Her brown eyes looked directly at him without fear or hesitation. "Captain Zethver," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Captain Lisa Martinez, commanding officer of the UCS Dakota. Welcome aboard." Zethver had studied human greeting customs. He took her hand and shook it firmly. Her grip was strong for such a small being. "Thank you, Captain Martinez. I look forward to learning about your operations." "I'm sure you'll find it interesting," Martinez said with a slight smile. "Let me introduce your liaison officer." A human male approached them. He was tall for his species, with short brown hair and calm blue eyes. His movements were controlled and precise. "Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan," he said, offering his hand to Zethver. "I'll be showing you around and answering your questions." Zethver shook Sullivan's hand as well. The human's grip was even stronger than the captain's. "I appreciate your time, Commander." "Just call me Jake," Sullivan said. "We're not big on formality when we're working together." This surprised Zethver. Corvani military culture demanded strict protocol at all times. But he nodded politely. When in human space, follow human customs. Captain Martinez excused herself to attend to ship business. Sullivan led Zethver through the corridors of the Dakota. The halls were wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side comfortably. The walls were painted in soft colors that were easy on the eyes. Zethver noticed small details everywhere. Handholds were placed at regular intervals. Warning signs were clear and simple. Everything seemed designed for practical use. "Your ship is very functional," Zethver observed. "That's the idea," Sullivan replied. "Form follows function. If something doesn't help us do our job better, we don't need it." They passed several crew members in the hallway. Each one nodded or said hello to Sullivan. Many of them looked curiously at Zethver, but without hostility. One young woman with red hair smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, sir." "Your crew seems friendly," Zethver said. "They're good people," Sullivan agreed. "We spend months together in space. Being friendly makes life easier for everyone." Sullivan showed Zethver to his quarters. The room was small but comfortable. It had a bed, a desk, storage space, and a small bathroom. The walls displayed a screen that could show views of space or other images. There was also a communication panel for ship announcements and messages. "Dinner is at 1800 hours in the main mess hall," Sullivan said. "I'll come get you at 1750 if you'd like." "That would be helpful," Zethver said. "I want to meet more of your crew." After Sullivan left, Zethver unpacked his belongings. He placed his personal items carefully in the storage areas. The room felt strange but not uncomfortable. Human. Furniture was designed for their smaller bodies, but it worked well enough for him. He activated the wall screen and selected a view of space outside. Stars moved slowly past as the ship traveled. It was peaceful in a way that surprised him. Corvani ships usually displayed tactical information or news feeds. This simple view of stars seemed almost meditation like. At 1750 hours, Sullivan knocked on his door. They walked together to the mess hall. The room was larger than Zethver expected. Tables and chairs filled the space, and crew members sat in small groups eating and talking. The noise level was moderate but cheerful. Sullivan led him to a serving area where crew members selected their food. We have synthesized proteins, but our chef also prepares traditional dishes from different human cultures, Sullivan explained. Amy over there makes excellent tacos. Tony does great Italian food. Beth bakes bread that tastes like it came from Earth. Zethver looked around the room as they found seats. Crew members were laughing and talking together. Some showed pictures on small devices to their table mates. Others played simple games while they ate. The atmosphere was relaxed and comfortable. Do your people always eat together like this? Zethver asked. Usually, Sullivan said. Unless duty requires otherwise. Sharing meals builds relationships. We trust each other more when we know each other as people, not just job titles. A young man with sandy hair approached their table. Mind if I join you? He asked. Sullivan introduced him as Communications Officer Amy Chan's partner, Engineer Tony Brooks. So you're here to learn about humans, Tony said with interest. What do you want to know? Everything, Zethver replied honestly. Your species is still new to galactic politics, but you have gained influence quickly. I want to understand. How? Tony laughed. We're stubborn, I guess. When we decide to do something, we keep trying until it works. More crew members joined their table during the meal. Navigator Beth Walsh, Medical Officer Dr. Sarah Kim, and Weapons Specialist Mike Rodriguez all introduced themselves. Each had questions about Corvani culture, and Zethver found himself enjoying the conversation more than he expected. Dr. Kim was particularly interested in Corvani medical practices. Do your people have family units like humans do? She asked. We have breeding partnerships and offspring care units, Zethver explained. But not the emotional bonds that humans form. That must be lonely, Beth said quietly. Zethver considered this. We do not experience loneliness as humans do. We find purpose in duty and achievement. But who do you share your achievements with? Mike asked. Who celebrates when you succeed or comforts you when things go wrong? The question puzzled Zethver. Why would I need someone else for those things? The humans at the table exchanged glances. Sullivan spoke carefully. For us, sharing experiences makes them more meaningful. Joy shared is greater joy. Pain shared is less pain. After dinner, Sullivan showed Zethver the ship's common areas. There was a recreation room where crew members played games, read, or watched entertainment. A small gym provided exercise equipment. A quiet lounge offered comfortable seating for conversation or rest. Your crew spends a lot of time together outside of work, Zethver observed. We're not just a crew, Sullivan said. We're a family. When you're in space for months at a time, the people around you become the most important thing in your universe. In the recreation room, Zethver saw something that surprised him. Several crew members had personal photos displayed on tables and walls. Images of children, elderly humans, and groups of people smiling together filled the spaces. Are these relatives? He asked. Family and friends from home, confirmed a young technician named Carl. I've got my parents, my sister, and my nephew there. Haven't seen them in 8 months, but looking at their pictures helps. Does this not make you sad? Zethver asked. Sometimes, Carl admitted, but it also reminds me why I'm here. I'm protecting them and people like them. As the evening continued, Zethver watched the crew interact. They seemed genuinely interested in each other's lives. They remembered personal details and asked follow-up questions about previous conversations. When someone looked tired or worried, others offered help or just listened. Sullivan walked him back to his quarters at the end of the evening. "What did you think of your first day?" he asked. "Your people are very different from what I expected," Zethver said honestly. "I thought humans would be more focused on individual achievement." "Some are," Sullivan said. "But most of us learned long ago that we're stronger together than apart. Tomorrow I'll show you our tactical systems and training procedures. You might find those interesting too." Alone in his quarters, Zethver reviewed the day's observations. Human behavior patterns were more complex than Corvani intelligence reports suggested. Their emotional connections seemed to drive their actions in ways that pure logic could not explain. He made notes on his personal device about crew interactions, ship design, and cultural practices. The Corvani High Command would want detailed reports about human military capabilities. But Zethver found himself more curious about the emotional bonds that seemed central to human society. As he prepared for sleep, Zethver wondered what tomorrow would bring. He was beginning to suspect that understanding humans would require more than studying their technology and tactics. It would require understanding why they chose to live and work the way they did. The stars continued to move past his window as the UCS Dakota traveled. Very moment when those standards were most difficult to uphold. They were being asked to show restraint when everything. The final week of the Kepler 442b operation brought changes that Zectar had not anticipated. The bombing had created a fundamental shift in how the humans approached their mission, but not in the way he had expected. Instead of abandoning their principles entirely, the humans had chosen to refine them. They maintained their commitment to proper treatment of prisoners, but they implemented security measures that made future attacks nearly impossible. They continued to provide medical care to wounded Kreks, but they did so under strict supervision. They still distinguished between war criminals and regular soldiers, but they no longer took cooperative behavior at face value. The investigation into the bombing had revealed a complex network of communication among the Kreks prisoners that had been completely hidden from human observers. The bomber had not been acting alone. Nearly a dozen prisoners had been aware of various aspects of the planned attack, and some had been planning additional strikes if the first had succeeded. This discovery led to a complete overhaul of prisoner processing procedures. Each remaining Kreks was subjected to intensive interrogation using advanced psychological and technological methods. The humans employed truth detection devices, cross-referenced testimony, and conducted deep background investigations into every prisoner's history and associations. The results were sobering. Of the remaining 160 Kreks prisoners, 43 were found to have some level of knowledge about planned attacks or escape attempts. Another 27 had actively participated in the torture and execution of civilians, but had managed to hide their involvement during the initial screening. The executions began at dawn on the 7th day after the bombing. 70 Kreks prisoners were taken from their holding areas and shot by firing squad. The process was efficient and professional, but there was no ceremony or satisfaction in it. The humans carried out the executions with the same grim determination they brought to all their duties. Zectar observed the proceedings from a distance. He watched as human soldiers who had been struggling with questions of mercy and justice simply did what needed to be done. There was no celebration, no sense of revenge satisfied. Just the quiet elimination of threats that could no longer be tolerated. What struck him most was how the human civilians reacted to the executions. He had expected relief or satisfaction from people who had been living in fear since the bombing. Instead, he saw mostly sadness and exhaustion. These people had wanted safety, but they took no joy in the deaths that provided it. It needed to be done, an elderly human woman told him as they watched the last group of condemned prisoners being led away. "I wish it hadn't been necessary." "You are not pleased that your tormentors are being punished?" "I'm pleased that they can't hurt anyone else. But taking a life, even a guilty life, isn't something to celebrate. It's just something that sometimes has to be done." This response puzzled Zectar. Most species he knew would have demanded public executions and elaborate ceremonies to mark the punishment of their enemies. The humans seemed to view necessary killing as a burden rather than a victory. After the executions, the remaining 90 Krex prisoners were divided into 3 categories. 37 were classified as definite security risks and placed in maximum security isolation. These were individuals who had shown no remorse for their actions and had expressed continued loyalty to the Krex. Empire's goals. 20-8 were classified as potential rehabilitation candidates. These prisoners had shown genuine remorse for their government's actions and had provided valuable intelligence about Krex military operations. They would remain in secure custody but would be eligible for work programs and eventual release. The final 25 were classified as low-security prisoners of war. These individuals had been conscripted into Krex service against their will and had taken no part in civilian abuse. Several had actually tried to help prisoners when they thought they wouldn't be caught. They would be held in comfortable conditions. Until the end of hostilities, the classification process took another 3 days and involved input from psychologists, intelligence analysts, and the rescued civilians who had interacted with each prisoner. It was thorough, fair, and completely unforgiving to those found guilty of crimes. During this period, Zektar was assigned to work with Colonel Nathan Cross, one of the senior tactical advisors who was preparing assessments for the overall campaign. Cross was a thoughtful man with graying hair and intelligent eyes who had spent most of his career studying alien military cultures. Colonel Cross, Zektar said as they reviewed intelligence reports in the temporary command center, I have been observing your people's response to this crisis. I must ask you something that has been troubling me. What's that, Commander? Your people have shown remarkable restraint in dealing with prisoners, even after the bombing. But I have also seen them capable of tremendous violence when they believe it is justified. My question is this: what would happen if your people ever decided that restraint was no longer possible? Cross set down his reports and looked at Zektar with serious eyes. That's a very perceptive question, and a very dangerous one. Why dangerous? Because the answer might change how other species view humanity, and that could have consequences none of us want to face. Cross stood up and walked to the window of the command center. Through the transparent walls, they could see human soldiers going about their duties with quiet efficiency. Medics treated wounded civilians. Engineers repaired damaged infrastructure. Guards maintained security over the remaining prisoners. You've seen us at war, Commander. You've seen how we fight and how we choose to limit ourselves. What you're really asking is, what would happen if we removed those limits? Yes, exactly. The honest answer is that we would become the most dangerous force the galaxy has ever seen. Not because we're naturally more violent than other species, but because we're naturally more organized, more innovative, and more persistent than most of our neighbors. Cross paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Right now, we show mercy because we choose to. We follow rules of war because we believe in them. We distinguish between combatants and civilians because we think it's morally necessary. But all of those constraints are self-imposed, and if you chose to remove them, if we ever decided that our enemies had forfeited all claim to mercy, if we ever concluded that the rules of war were putting innocent lives at risk, if we ever determined that the distinction between combatant and supporter was meaningless, Cross shook his head. The galaxy would face something it has never seen before. What would that be? Total war. Not the limited conflicts we fight now, where we try to minimize casualties and preserve infrastructure and maintain some hope of eventual peace. Real total war, where the only goal is the complete elimination of the enemy's ability to resist. Zektar felt a chill run through his alien physiology. You have the capacity for such warfare? We have the capacity, yes. The technology, the organizational ability, the sheer stubborn refusal to quit that would be required. What we don't have is the willingness to use that capacity, yet. What would it take to create that willingness? Cross turned back to face him. An enemy that convinced us that mercy was weakness. An enemy that used our restraint against us so effectively that we concluded it was getting innocent people killed. An enemy that made us believe the only way to protect the things we care about was to abandon the principles we currently hold. The Kreks have done terrible things. They have enslaved and tortured innocents. Why are they not such an enemy? Because they're not an existential threat. They're cruel and barbaric, but they're not trying to wipe out humanity or everything humanity stands for. They're not forcing us to choose between our survival and our principles. Cross sat back down and picked up his reports again. The Kreks are a problem to be solved, not a threat to be eliminated. We can defeat them while maintaining our moral standards. It's difficult and it costs us, but it's possible. But if you ever faced an enemy that made such restraint impossible, then God help them, because we wouldn't. That afternoon, Zektar attended a briefing on the overall progress of the liberation campaign. Admiral Sandra Gray had arrived to personally oversee the final phases of the operation and to begin planning for the post-war reconstruction of the occupied territories. The briefing covered military progress across a dozen star systems. Human forces had liberated 6 planets and destroyed 3 major Kreks fleets. Civilian casualties had been kept to a minimum, and infrastructure damage was being repaired as quickly as possible. But what impressed Zektar most was the scope of the human planning for the post-war period. They weren't just thinking about defeating the Kreks military. They were planning for economic reconstruction, political rehabilitation, and cultural reconciliation across dozens of worlds. Our goal isn't just to win this war, Admiral Gray explained to the assembled officers. Our goal is to win the peace that follows. We want to create conditions where conflicts like this become impossible. How do you propose to do that, Admiral? Major Foster asked. Education, economic development, and political reform. We're going to help the occupied worlds build the kind